The moment the news surfaced, it did not arrive as a simple casting update or a routine industry shift. It landed with the weight of something far more significant, something that immediately sparked questions not just about production decisions, but about narrative intent, emotional closure, and the deeper mechanics of storytelling within a world that had always thrived on unpredictability. The departure of Kimberlin Brown from the bold and the beautiful did not feel like an ending. It felt like a move, calculated, deliberate, and layered with implications that extended far beyond the surface. Because in a universe like this, nothing is ever just what it seems. And Sheila, perhaps more than any other character, had built her legacy on that very principle. To understand the weight of this departure, one has to look beyond the immediate shock and examine what Sheila represents within the narrative structure of the show. She is not simply a villain, nor merely a source of conflict. She is an embodiment of chaos that refuses to be contained, a character whose very existence challenges the idea of permanence. Time and again, she has defied logic, defied consequence, and most importantly, defied finality. Death for Sheila has never been absolute. It has been a pause, a transition, a strategic disappearance before an inevitable return. And that is precisely what makes this moment so compelling. Because if the actress behind Sheila is stepping away, the question is no longer just about the character's fate. It becomes something more intricate, more layered. How do you remove a character who was never meant to be fully removed? The recent storyline, charged with tension, violence, and psychological unraveling, already laid the groundwork for something that felt dangerously close to an ending. The confrontation, the blow, the collapse, the silence that followed. It all carried the hallmarks of a final act. But within that finality, there was also ambiguity. A body that does not move is not always a body that is gone. A scene that appears conclusive is not always the truth. And in the world of this show, ambiguity is never accidental. It is design. So when the narrative aligns so perfectly with the real-world exit of Kimberlin Brown, it becomes impossible not to question whether what we are witnessing is truly an ending or something far more strategic. Because if this were simply about writing Sheila out, the show could have chosen clarity. It could have chosen confirmation, closure, resolution. It could have allowed the audience to see, to know, to accept. But instead, what it offers is uncertainty. A disappearance rather than a declaration. A silence rather than a conclusion. And silence, in this context, is never empty. It is filled with possibility. From a storytelling perspective, staging Sheila's death, whether real or implied, serves multiple functions at once. On the surface, it provides an immediate shock, a dramatic peak that reshapes the emotional landscape of the characters involved. Taylor's psychological descent, Deacon's moral entrapment, Steffi's growing suspicion. These arcs gain intensity precisely because they are rooted in something that feels irreversible. The absence of Sheila becomes a presence in itself, haunting every decision, every reaction, every moment of doubt. But beneath that surface, there is a second layer, one that speaks directly to the long-term structure of the narrative. By avoiding definitive closure, the story preserves flexibility. And flexibility, in a show built on longevity, is everything. Because what happens if Kimberlin Brown returns? What happens if circumstances change, if timing aligns, if the story demands it? If Sheila is truly gone, the door is closed. But if she is merely missing, presumed, hidden, or transformed, the door remains open. And in this world, doors are rarely meant to stay closed forever. This is where the line between fiction and reality begins to blur in a way that is both fascinating and intentional. The departure of an actress becomes not just a production decision, but a narrative tool, something that can be woven into the story itself to enhance its complexity rather than limit it. Instead of forcing an ending, the show creates a question. And questions are far more powerful than answers. Because they linger, they evolve, they invite speculation. From a psychological standpoint, this ambiguity also serves to deepen the impact on the characters left behind. If Sheila were definitively gone, the emotional response would follow a more predictable path: grief, relief, resolution. But with uncertainty, those emotions become unstable. Doubt creeps in. Fear resurfaces. The past refuses to stay buried because there is no confirmation that it truly is. Taylor's guilt, for example, becomes far more potent if she cannot be certain of the outcome of her actions. Did she end Sheila's life, or did she merely trigger another chapter in a cycle that refuses to end? That question alone is enough to fracture her sense of reality, to blur the line between memory and imagination, to turn every quiet moment into a confrontation with something unresolved. Deacon, too, becomes trapped in a role that cannot be easily defined. If Sheila is gone, but if Sheila is alive, somewhere, watching, waiting, then he is something else entirely, a participant in a narrative he does not fully control, a man caught between guilt and fear of what might still come. And Steffi, perhaps more than anyone, becomes the embodiment of that lingering uncertainty. Her instincts tell her that something is wrong, that the absence of Sheila does not equate to safety. She has seen this pattern before. She understands, on a level others might not, that the most dangerous threat is not always the one that is visible. It is the one that disappears without explanation. This layered impact is what makes the potential staging of Sheila's death so effective. It is not just about removing a character. It is about transforming that character into something else, an idea, a possibility, a shadow that extends beyond physical presence. And that transformation allows the story to continue evolving. Of course, there is also the audience to consider. Viewers who have followed Sheila's journey understand her history. They know her patterns. They recognize the signs of a supposed ending that may not be as final as it appears. And that awareness creates a dynamic where the audience is not just observing the story, but actively questioning it, engaging with it, anticipating what might come next. That engagement is not accidental. It is the result of years of storytelling that have conditioned viewers to expect the unexpected, to look beyond the surface, to question even the most definitive moments. So when Kimberlin Brown exits, the narrative does not simply lose a character. It gains a mystery. And mysteries are sustainable. They can be revisited, reinterpreted, reintroduced at any moment, reshaping the story in ways that feel both surprising and inevitable. From a broader perspective, this approach also reflects a deeper understanding of what keeps long-running dramas alive. It is not just the characters themselves, but the potential they carry, the unresolved threads, the lingering questions that can be pulled at any time to create new tension, new conflict, new direction. Sheila, even in absence, embodies that potential. Her story does not end with her disappearance. It expands. It becomes something that can be referenced, feared, speculated about, woven into future arcs in ways that maintain continuity while allowing for reinvention. And that is perhaps the most compelling aspect of this entire situation. Because whether Sheila is truly gone or not may ultimately be less important than the fact that her presence still shapes the narrative. She remains a force, a possibility, a shadow that refuses to fully fade. So, is this staged death simply a way to write Kimberlin Brown out of the show? On the surface, it may appear that way. But beneath that surface, it feels like something far more intentional. It feels like a pause, a strategic retreat, a narrative choice that preserves the essence of the character while allowing the story to move forward. Because in a world where nothing is ever truly final, the idea of Sheila being gone is not an ending. It is a question. And as long as that question remains unanswered, the story is not over. It is waiting. The night did not descend all at once. It crept in slowly, seeping through the edges of the cliff house like a quiet warning no one fully understood until it was too late. What had already been a fragile, strained atmosphere inside those walls became something far more volatile, something that hovered just beneath the surface of every breath, every glance, every unspoken thought. The earlier tension had not dissolved, it had settled, hardened, waiting for the smallest spark to ignite it into something irreversible. And that spark came not as a subtle shift, but as a violent interruption. The door did not open gently. It burst inward with a force that shattered any illusion of safety the house had tried to maintain. Sheila entered not as a guest, not as an intruder uncertain of her welcome, but as a force of intent, her presence carrying with it a storm that refused to be contained. There was no hesitation in her movement, no attempt to disguise the purpose behind her arrival. Her eyes were locked onto Taylor, sharp and unrelenting, filled with something that had moved far beyond suspicion into conviction. Taylor felt it immediately. The weight of that gaze, the undeniable certainty that whatever fragile distance she had tried to create between herself and Sheila had been obliterated in an instant. Her body reacted before her mind could catch up, every muscle tightening, every instinct screaming that this was not just confrontation. This was escalation. Sheila's voice cut through the room, low at first, controlled in a way that made it even more dangerous. There was no need for shouting. The threat lived in the calm, in the deliberate pacing of her words, in the way she spoke as though she already knew the truth and was simply waiting for confirmation. She circled Taylor emotionally, not physically, pressing on every weakness, every fear, every doubt that had already taken root. She spoke of betrayal, of deception, of the consequences that always followed those who underestimated her. And with every word, the tension tightened. Taylor tried to respond, tried to hold on to the remnants of composure she had fought so hard to maintain, but the ground beneath her felt unstable, as though reality itself had begun to shift. The fear she had been carrying, quiet, internal, manageable, suddenly became external, immediate, undeniable. It was no longer something she could reason with or suppress. It was standing in front of her, breathing, watching, closing in. The room seemed smaller, the air heavier, the distance between them shrinking not physically, but psychologically. Sheila stepped closer, not in haste, but with purpose, each movement calculated, each second stretched to its limit. She did not need to touch Taylor to make the threat real. It was already there, already pressing in from all sides. And then something broke. It was not a decision. It was not a thought. It was instinct. Taylor's hand moved before she understood what it was reaching for, her fingers closing around the nearest object that carried weight, that promised impact, that offered even the smallest illusion of control in a moment that had spiraled beyond her grasp. Her heart pounded so loudly it drowned out everything else, her vision narrowing until there was nothing but the immediate threat in front of her. And then she swung. The sound was dull, heavy, final. For a fraction of a second, everything froze. Sheila's body reacted before her expression could change, the force of the blow disrupting her balance, her certainty, her control. The fire in her eyes flickered, then disappeared entirely as she collapsed, her form hitting the floor with a stillness that felt unnatural, as though life itself had been abruptly interrupted. Silence followed. Not the fragile silence of tension, but something deeper, something absolute. Taylor stood there, the object still in her hand, her entire body trembling as though it no longer belonged to her. Her breath came in shallow, uneven bursts, her mind struggling to process what had just happened, to reconcile the act with the person she believed herself to be. Slowly, almost mechanically, her gaze lowered to the floor. Sheila did not move. A thin line of red began to spread across the white surface beneath her, stark against the pristine surroundings, impossible to ignore. It was not dramatic, not excessive, but it was enough. Enough to confirm that this was not a moment that could be undone. Taylor's fingers loosened, the object slipping from her grasp as the full weight of reality crashed into her. This was not fear anymore. This was consequence. Her knees felt weak, her body threatening to give in to the shock that surged through her, but she remained standing, held upright by something that felt less like strength and more like paralysis. Her eyes remained fixed on Sheila, searching for movement, for any sign that this was not as final as it appeared. There was none. And then Deacon arrived. He did not rush in with noise or urgency. He stepped into the aftermath, his presence marked first by stillness, by the sudden halt in his movement as he took in the scene before him. His eyes moved quickly, assessing, calculating, absorbing the details with a clarity that contrasted sharply with Taylor's fractured state. He understood immediately. Not the why, not the emotional buildup that had led to this moment, but the what. And the what was enough. He moved toward Taylor first, his hand reaching out not just to steady her physically, but to anchor her in a reality she was already slipping away from. His voice was low, controlled, carrying an urgency that did not rely on volume. He spoke to her, grounding her, forcing her to focus, to breathe, to remain present. Because panic would only make this worse. Then his attention shifted to Sheila. He knelt beside her, his movements careful, deliberate, as he checked for signs of life, for anything that might suggest this was not what it seemed. But the stillness remained, unbroken, and with it came a realization that tightened something deep within him. This was serious. More serious than anything they could afford to ignore. And in that moment, something changed in him as well. Because there was no time for hesitation. There was only decision. The idea did not form all at once. It emerged in fragments, shaped by instinct, by history, by the knowledge of who Sheila was and what her absence might mean. She had disappeared before. She had been presumed gone, only to return. The narrative existed. The possibility was believable. And that possibility became an option. He spoke quickly now, his words sharper, more focused, outlining what needed to be done, not as a suggestion, but as a necessity. The situation could not be exposed. Not like this. Not without destroying everything. Taylor listened, but her understanding came slowly, filtered through shock, through guilt, through a growing sense of unreality that made everything feel distant, as though she were watching someone else's life unfold. But even in that state, she grasped the core of what he was saying. They had to hide it. The act itself felt impossible. But the alternative felt worse. And so they moved, not smoothly, not without hesitation, but with a kind of desperate coordination that came from necessity rather than confidence. Every action felt heavier than it should, every movement carrying the weight of what they were trying to conceal. The house, once a place of safety, now felt like a witness, its walls holding secrets that would not remain buried forever. Time blurred, details merged. And when it was done, when the immediate evidence had been removed, when the visible traces had been minimized, the silence returned. But it was different now. It was filled with what had happened. Upstairs, the world continued, unaware of the shift that had taken place below. But small details began to surface. Subtle at first, almost insignificant. A fragment, barely noticeable. A piece that did not belong. Steffi was the one who found it, her instincts guiding her towards something that others might have overlooked. She did not know what she was looking for at first, only that something felt off, that the atmosphere carried a residue that could not be explained. When she saw it, when she picked it up, it did not immediately reveal its meaning. But it planted a seed. Hope saw it too, her expression shifting as she recognized the same unease, the same quiet alarm that had begun to take shape. Neither of them spoke it aloud, but the thought was there, forming, growing, refusing to be dismissed. Something had happened, and it did not feel like coincidence. Below, Taylor sat in silence, her hands still trembling, her mind replaying the moment over and over again with a clarity that felt unbearable. Each repetition sharpened the details, deepened the impact, reinforced the reality she could not escape. Sleep, when it came, brought no relief. Only images, fragments, the sound, the stillness. She began to see things that were not there, to feel a presence that lingered even in absence, her mind refusing to release the weight of what she had done. The guilt did not arrive all at once. It built, layer by layer, until it became something that consumed her from within. Deacon carried his own burden. Outwardly, he played his role well. Concerned, confused, searching. He asked questions, expressed worry, mirrored the reactions expected of someone unaware of the truth. But beneath that performance was a tension that never fully relaxed, a constant awareness that one misstep, one inconsistency, could unravel everything. He was no longer just involved. He was complicit, and complicity has a way of changing a person. Elsewhere, far removed from the immediate consequences, a phone lit up in the darkness. The message that appeared was brief, but its implications were anything but. An image, blurry, indistinct, but recognizable enough. The outline of a body, the suggestion of blood, the hint of a scene that should not exist. The figure holding the phone did not react with shock. There was no surprise, only interest, because this was not the end of something. It was the beginning. The message that followed was even simpler. The plan had succeeded. But now a new phase was beginning, one that would not rely on fear alone, one that would demand answers. And in that demand, the truth would begin to surface.
Piece by piece. Oh.